You in here. And next slide, please, Meredith. So our team is here today to talk about the comprehensive plan, the draft environmental impact statement that was released a few weeks ago, kind of what that tells us about the different land use alternatives, and next steps in the project, as well as how you can submit comment on the DEIS. So my name is Rebecca Kennedy. I am the Deputy Director for Community Development, Project Manager on the Comprehensive Plan. I'm joined by Brian Snodgrass, Principal Planner, person with the most comprehensive planning knowledge on our team. Meredith Herbst, who's an Associate Planner and does a lot of work on understanding the environmental impacts as well as designing engagement. And then Anne Broach is one of she's on our consultant team with WSP. She is the Vice President of Environmental Planning and led the consultant role in drafting the EIS. And so she's also here to be a resource if needed for your questions. Next slide, please. So before we jump in, just a few kind of housekeeping items. We're going to do a presentation and then we'll have lots of time for questions and answers. I'm going to be the main presenter, but definitely will be relying on my team to step in for some sections as well as to help answer questions. If you send comments to us through the chat function of this Zoom meeting, they will not be considered formal comments for the DEIS. And that's because there's a process through the State Environmental Policy Act that you have to provide formal comments in. We will walk you through this, but just know you're going to have to, you can send them to us now, and obviously we'll see them and take them in, but they won't represent a formal comment that we have to respond to in the final environmental impact statement. Meredith has just put information in the chat about how to submit those formal comments. So just be aware of that. Let's see. So questions again are going to be welcomed after the presentation. You can put them in the chat while we're talking, and Meredith will help kind of facilitate getting those answered after the presentation. This is being recorded, just FYI, and it will be available on our website. And then by attending this event, we have a set of community agreements about how we all sort of engage with each other in this forum. So by attending this, you've agreed to those terms and conditions, or that community agreement. So just please, let's all be respectful toward each other, whether we agree or not. And lastly, thank you so much for being here and caring about the comprehensive plan update. We're glad to have you. Next slide, please. So in terms of the agenda of the presentation, we'll do a kind of quick overview of the comprehensive plan. What is it? What are the land use alternatives that we're analyzing through the draft environmental impact statement? We'll do a kind of overview of environmental impact statements, like what they are and why we do them. We'll review the key findings of this DEIS, which is really looking at the potential actions of a no action alternative and 2 action alternatives, alternative 1 and alternative 2. And then walk you through potential impacts. We can go into more detail on some of this stuff depending on questions, and then how to provide comments again and sort of what's coming up, and we'll have that Q&A. Next slide, please. Keep going. So the comprehensive plan is fundamentally about managing the future of the built and natural environment in Vancouver. It's a 20-year plan. It includes supporting goals and policies, as well as an updated land use map and an updated development code, which is Title 20 of the Vancouver Municipal Code. You can see the vision for the comprehensive plan, which applies to the time frame of 2025 through 2045. The council helped create and endorse this, but the vision is that Vancouver is an equitable and prosperous community, which ensures that all residents, businesses, and organizations benefit from the growth and advancement we make together. Vancouver will be recognized for our quality of life, as evidenced by affordable housing in vibrant, safe, and walkable neighborhoods, access to jobs, and economic opportunity for all, and leading-edge efforts to address climate change. So that's sort of the big picture vision of where we're trying to go and get to by 2045 in terms of the built environment. So people submit comments. We'll be submitting comments, and our city council, the project team, other city staff, our boards and commissions will all use those to try to inform sort of the what goes into the comprehensive plan, and eventually that will inform the work of people across city departments and community partners in the years to come. This plan was last updated in 2011, so a lot has changed since 2011. And lastly, but still very importantly, a comprehensive planning is required by the State Growth Management Act, or GMA. It requires that jurisdictions do comprehensive planning no less than 10 every 10 years. It's called a periodic update cycle, and that is where we are in now. Important to note that if you're noticing, 2011 to 2025 is not 10 years, and that's because there was a delay in the statutory requirement during COVID that gave communities some extra time, just given the restrictions on during that time. Next slide, please. So the comprehensive plan covers a lot of things, again, related to kind of what you see when you step outside your house, what's in your neighborhood. When you walk down your street, what stores do you see? What parks do you see? What housing do you see, right? That the comp plan sets the framework for what can be built where and what can go in those buildings, and how we plan for things like parks and schools and open space. So it really, I like to say, like, the comprehensive plan, though it sets the stage for very slow and incremental change, it does shape what you see when you walk out your door over time. So it has chapters on land use and development, that's on housing, equity and inclusion, climate, economic opportunity and jobs, parks, recreation, open space, transportation network, public facilities. So those are things like obviously the schools, utilities like water and sewer, things like fire stations, community centers, police stations, but it also covers public services. So think the delivery of emergency services, the running of the water treatment plant, things like that, the picking up of trash and recycling. And then lastly, annexation. Under the Growth Management Act, cities are anticipated to annex their urban growth areas within the next 20 years, and that's what you're supposed to plan for through your comprehensive plan. The Vancouver urban growth area is one of the largest in the state. It's about 175,000 people. So planning for annexation of that very, very large area and the assumption of urban service provision in that area is a complex challenge at the minimum. So each chapter will have background information, goals, policies, and actions. We'll have a map of land use designations. And again, that's kind of what we're focused on today, is the EIS analyzes the impacts of different alternatives for land use maps. It includes plans for the provision of public services and facilities, and again, has an updated zoning code, which is Title 20 in the Vancouver Municipal Code. Next slide, please. And under GMA, we are required to do a lot of things through our comprehensive planning. So we have to, essentially, we are assigned population growth by the county. So the county has a special role. Clark County, all counties have a special role under the Growth Management Act. They do projections for population growth, household growth, and job growth. And then they distribute those out to the various jurisdictions and the unincorporated areas. So we are planning for to add 81,000 people in the next 20 years, which will bring Vancouver's population within the current city limits to 281,000 approximately. We are planning for we are required to plan for a minimum of 38,000 new housing units to serve that population, and 43,100 more jobs as well. We also can't just show that we have zoned capacity for these housing units. We have to say that we've created regulations and other programs to plan for housing at all incomes, and we have targets within those income bands. So you can see that in the chart at the top. We are supposed to have, a lot of housing that is below 50% of median income, which requires direct subsidy through the city, the state, and usually both. And we have to, which is new, account for racially disparate impacts. So we have to understand how the outcomes of different policies in the past impacted different folks based on their race and ethnicity, and examine our new policies and decisions through the lens of eliminating race and ethnicity-based disparities directly coming out of comprehensive plan actions and policies. Next slide, please. We also, in 2023, the state passed HB 1110, which is the middle housing bill, that requires us to allow at least 4 units on every single residential lot in the city. So I'm going to say it again, at least 4 units on every single residential lot in the city, and at least 6 if 2 of those units are affordable or if they're in proximity to transit. It also requires us to allow up to 2 or at least 2 accessory dwelling units on every residential lot as well. And so this kind of gives you a sense of what middle housing is. It's typically like something in between a single family home and like an apartment complex. It's duplexes, threeplexes, fourplexes, stacked flats, cottage housing, courtyard buildings, townhomes, that kind of sort of mid-scale development. Next slide. The state also changed laws recently, 2023 onward, essentially to say that standards for middle housing cannot be more restrictive than those for a detached single-family home. So we cannot require middle housing to do more than we require a single-family home to do. The state just recently got rid of, basically prohibits jurisdictions from having minimum parking requirements for affordable housing, and it can have no more than 0.5 per unit for all other housing types. It allows for what we call single loaded or 1 stairwell buildings up to 6 stories. This is not sort of as well known as these other bills, but important because it allows for multifamily or apartment buildings that are different, where you have units that are different sizes and configurations, and allows for more family size units. So important on sort of accommodating, as we add more of this multifamily housing, it needs to accommodate different household configurations, including families. We have to align impact fees to the size of housing, which really means we have to calibrate them. So smaller housing pays lower impact fees for traffic impacts, school impacts, and park impacts than larger housing does. And we're working on that now. I think we're looking at connecting it to square footage, which is the most direct way to say, there's this square footage is less than this, so it has this percentage of the overall total. This is bigger, so it has a greater one. And then we have to allow permanently supportive housing everywhere. So that's housing with services on site. So whether that's mental health services, behavioral health, whatever it is, medical services, but it needs to be allowed everywhere. Next slide, please. And then in addition to the state requirements, our council has also developed a pretty robust framework of goals and guiding policies that are informing this work. They have endorsed a concept called connected and accessible neighborhoods, which is the idea that, within your neighborhood, kind of near where you live, you can access many of the daily services and things you need. So think childcare, school, grocery store, bus stop, that kind of stuff. Equitable access to opportunity. So this is a concept that basically says, regardless of your zip code, you have access, you have the same access to opportunities, whether that be educational opportunities, whether it be transportation infrastructure, healthcare, schools, and then build up, not out. So Vancouver is landlocked, UGA to the north and Camas to the east. River to the west. And so essentially, in order to meet these goals, we have to use land more efficiently, which means not building out, because there's nowhere out really to build, and building up more to meet these targets. More housing at all income levels. We talked about that, so I won't belabor it. Bold climate action and equitable adaptation to climate change. The city has a climate action framework, very ambitious goals for being net neutral carbon emissions by the year 2040. A safe multimodal transportation options that works for everyone, regardless of their age or how they choose to travel. more jobs in the community, so more people can stay in Vancouver and in Clark County to work rather than traveling outside, and then community health and quality of life for everyone. So those are sort of the council's big guiding policies, and those really feed into the land use alternatives that we're going to walk you through. Next slide, please. So this is a long process, updating comprehensive plans, especially overhauling them completely to this magnitude, which is really what we're doing, given how long it's been since we updated it last time, all the change we've seen in that period, and also all the new requirements coming out of the legislature. So that takes a long time. So we've been doing this since 2023. There was a phase where it was really about learning about the community and socializing that this process was going on with community members. So sort of understanding the history of growth and development in Vancouver, understanding existing conditions in terms of what is our existing housing deficit now, what is the need now, plus in the future with growth, what's the kind of landscape of jobs and economic opportunities, how might we want to enhance that. And then a lot of visioning with community members, with our council, boards and commissions, different ad hoc groups that have been working on this project in terms of, sort of what do we want to see? What's that vision, sort of holistic vision for the future? Then we spent a lot of time developing these alternatives. We did a set of community mapping activities in the spring of 2024, where people had the opportunity to literally place different things on maps. We did that activity many times, big open community processes, as well as working with different groups who were interested. From that came the land use alternatives, so alternative 1 and alternative 2, which we have now analyzed under the sort of We Are Here, under the EIS, the draft environmental impact, and we are currently in the public comment period for that draft EIS, which it went from July 8th when it was released to September 8th. And again, we'll walk you through how to do that. So it's a formal comment under SEPA, or the State Environmental Policy Act. From this, we'll be refining the map to what we call a final or preferred alternative that the council will select and ultimately select and endorse. That'll also have a public process. Updated drafts of the plan itself. So that's all the goals and policies and actions, as well as the code and the map will be available for public comment. And then eventually we will adopt a final version of the plan, the map, and the code, all supported by a final environmental impact statement that will respond to all the comments we get during the public comment period of the draft environmental impact statement. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to walk through the alternatives. Important to note that under SEPA, again, the State Environmental Policy Act, which is what mandates we do this environmental impact statement, you have to compare what we call action alternatives, or things that change, things that are different from what exists today, versus a no action, which is generally what exists today. Important to note in this case that our no action on the bottom is the existing plan and regulations, but it also includes middle housing, so that 4 to 6 units on every residential lot, because per the legislature, if states don't adopt that, it will automatically go into effect anyway. So the state has a model code. If you don't adopt your own that complies, your model code goes into effect and you'll be issuing permits under the model code. So that's the no action. It's everything as it is today, plus middle housing. Alternative 1 and alternative 2, again, were developed through a very long process, and they were informed by many different things. We talked about the sort of council's policy priority areas, all those state requirements we walked through. We've talked to literally thousands of people through this process about what their needs are, what their hopes are, their aspirations for the future of the city, what they'd like to see in the future, and the mapping exercises. So a lot of community engagement has fed into this process. And then again, those existing and anticipated future outcomes. So what's the population we're planning for? What are the housing units we need and the jobs? So those all went into developing the 2 action alternatives, so alternative 1 and alternative 2. If you move kind of to the right of this slide, we're now analyzing that under a draft environmental impact statement process. There is a public comment period for that. Using this information and all the stuff on the left, We will develop a preferred alternative that combines features from both maps. I don't anticipate it. It's not selecting one or the other. It's a range of things we're asking people to comment on, and that will help inform the final preferred alternative. And again, we'll go through a process to adopt all of these, and it'll be supported by a final environmental impact statement, again, that will have to respond to all substantive comments received through the DEIS process. Next slide, please. So in terms of new zoning districts, so right now we have 17 zoning districts in the city. It's a lot. We are trying to simplify it so it's easier for folks to understand. And honestly, the city doesn't build most of the housing. We certainly don't build nearly any of the commercial space, right? The private market develops that stuff, and we want to have a legible process for them. So part of that is simplifying our zoning districts. So there's now 9 that we're looking at. 2 of those are parks and natural areas. So all existing parks and all existing natural areas will have one of these designations. Heavy industrial doesn't change very much. Think of areas like the Port of Vancouver, where you have a lot of manufacturing that has a lot of external impacts in terms of noise, odor, emissions, that kind of thing. So really, we're talking about where are we going to put these 6? Low scale neighborhood, medium scale neighborhood, mixed use neighborhood, regional activity center, institutional campus, and industrial employment. And so we'll talk about these. Meredith, what's the next slide look like? Does it describe them, or should I describe them here? Oh, okay, let's go back. So let me talk a little bit about these. The low scale neighborhood is really what you think of as your single family housing zones today. So that's places where you see a lot of, you see lots that can be, 15 to 10 to 15,000 square feet down to like 1,500, but it's really detached single family housing. So that's kind of what the low scale neighborhood is most similar to. And now the low scale neighborhood will allow, per state mandate, at least 4 to 6 units per lot. And it will also allow some neighborhood serving commercial amenities. So think coffee shop, small doctor's office, small daycare, like things that people need in their neighborhood, in their community, don't have a lot of impacts on adjacent housing, but do help build those more connected and accessible spaces. The medium scale neighborhood is really what's most similar to our multifamily zones. So that's places where you can build, 2 to 5 or 6-story apartment buildings. It also will allow for more, kind of neighborhood serving commercial uses, not a ton, like not big grocery stores that have tons of traffic, but again, those small coffee shops, little neighborhood market, doctor's office, that kind of thing that again kind of fit into the neighborhood and don't have a lot of negative impacts on adjacent housing. Mixed use neighborhoods are kind of where you see mix of uses now. So think our major corridors where you have projects that have commercial uses on the bottom, housing on the top, a lot of different commercial buildings of different scales. So think Fourth Plain, Mill Plain, Andreessen, Uptown, various areas, 192nd, 164th, right? Those all have some combination of sort of mixing and different housing types and different commercial uses. Regional activity center is where the most intense level of development will occur. So that's really, think about downtown where, buildings can really be as high as you want to build them, as long as you don't interfere with the airport. And you've got all kinds of mixing. You've got commercial uses, office uses, housing uses, big public spaces, institutional uses, that kind of thing. Industrial employment is really kind of like our light industrial lands. So those are areas where you're doing like low scale manufacturing. Typically, you don't want to put housing in this area, and it's not proposed to be allowed because there are externalities. There's like more traffic, things like that. It's important to note that industrial areas or light industrials a lot where we see a lot of our sort of family wage jobs that don't require a college degree. So it's where you see maybe not a lot of jobs per acre because people aren't jammed into like an office space, but you see really family wage jobs where people are making things, crafting things, manufacturing things, and then their products that they're selling, um, usually broadly, nationally and internationally, but locally as well. And then lastly, institutional campus. Think of areas like Clark College or Peace Health campus where you're really going to do some like master planning, right? Like long-term plans for sort of how a larger institution is going to evolve and serve the community. Next slide, please. So in terms of kind of a quick comparison of the no action, alternative 1 and alternative 2, the key difference is really density and mix of uses. They're all sort of I guess, degrees of each other in many ways, though that's not 100% true. But important to note that all the alternatives, under all the alternatives, growth and development will happen and change will occur over the next 20 years. We're not going to stop people from moving here. Our choice is not between growth or no growth. It is between managed growth and unmanaged growth. All of them have similar amounts and locations of parks, natural areas, institutional campus, and heavy industrial. And just to note that there's no proposal is like proposing to take away park space. Any existing park stays a park. Any existing natural area that are city owned, publicly owned, right, are intended to stay. So those don't change. Different alternatives might require us to add more parks in different areas, but there's no talk of converting any existing natural resources or parks. And then all the areas allow at least 4 units of housing per residential lot and a minimum of 6 if you are near transit or 2 of the units are affordable. So in terms of density and mix of uses, the no action has the sort of lowest of that because it really doesn't change things from how it is today. It's sort of, I always often describe environmental impact statements at a non-project citywide level of somewhat unsatisfying because no surprise, alternative 1 has higher density and intensity and mix of uses than the no action alternative, but slightly lower than alternative 2, which has the highest. So again, it's a range of potential impacts. In terms of zoning districts, the no action has the same as today. Alternative 1 has more low-scale neighborhood and an industrial employment land than alternative 2 does. In alternative 2, more of that low-scale neighborhood becomes medium-scale neighborhood, and more of that industrial employment land becomes regional activity center. Next slide, please. So in terms of what an EIS is, it is a large document. The requirements for completing it are spelled out by the State Environmental Policy Act. It describes how different policy and regulatory land use decisions may impact the built and natural environment. This one, because we're not talking about a development project, right? We don't have a site and we're not proposing a building on it where we could analyze exactly the impacts. It's going to have this impact on trees. It'll be this close to a wetland, right? This is citywide and it is non-project. So everything described here is general and not super specific, again, because this is a high-level policy document. Again, it is required by the state. We have a 2-month comment period that we're in right now and why I think we're all here. And again, it focuses on impacts inside the city. The impacts are analyzed on a citywide basis, but also to give people a little more granularity where we can. We've talked about like, okay, what will happen in West Vancouver, generally west of I-5, Central Vancouver, generally between I-5 and 205, and then East Vancouver, generally east of 205. And again, it compares order of magnitude. So low, medium, high, sometimes kind of unsatisfying. But again, it's sort of trying to give you that, sort of how do they relate to each other on a spectrum of potential impacts. And then it covers all this, these areas on the right. So land and shoreline, housing, aesthetics, which is really light and glare, historic and cultural preservation, transportation, noise, public services, impacts on air quality, greenhouse gases and climate, impacts on sort of what we call the earth section, which is just really looking at like geographical hazard areas like soils, topography, things like that. Water resources, so that's both our water facilities and how they're going to serve different people, our pipes and how they get water places, um, but also like how we manage stormwater, for instance, and then plants and animals. Next slide, please. So just going to give a high level overview of the key themes from the draft findings, and then don't want to blabber on too long and want to open it up for questions. And so we can go into more detail in different areas based on what people's interests are. But again, all alternatives have impacts, including the no action. Growth and change will occur no matter what. Generally, the way that the EIS analyzes impacts is it's tied to number of people and thus number of housing units or households. So generally, the no action, which has the fewest number of households, has the lowest impact because there's less households and that's what's generating the impact. Generally, alternatives 1 and alternative 2, which change things and allow for, accommodate more people and more households, have higher impacts because they have more. But not all things follow this because of differences in where housing and jobs are placed around the city in the different alternatives. And then the EIS isn't really geared to point this out too much, but we do try to highlight it in the document where impacts can be beneficial. So when you allow a greater range of housing types, right, you have housing that fits more people, depending on what stage of their life they're in. When you make it easier to site a small grocery store, you make it easier for people to get, to access food and have to like travel less far to get it. When you put childcare in neighborhoods, it's much easier for families and parents to, kind of manage that whole school, daycare, work, home thing that young families are dealing with. So we try to point out a lot. Well, we try to point out where it makes sense that there are quite significant benefits of changing potentially how we arrange different uses around the city. Next slide, please. And so while overall impacts generally increase with more housing, as I mentioned, some per household impacts decrease with more housing. So the more housing you have near, parks, schools, daycares, grocery stores, other services, right, the less people have to travel to access them. So you actually see vehicle miles traveled per capita or per household go down. That's an example of that. Also, when we update our regulations, we get better at doing certain things. So think about, regulating ecologically sensitive places like shorelines or critical areas. We update our tree code so more trees actually get planted with development. When you put things closer together, you can deliver key services more efficiently. So you have savings and efficiencies there. So there's things that we really benefit from updating our plans and our regulations. And then we talked earlier about like what is in this plan, and it's a set of sort of, policies where we want to go and the actions we're going to take to get there. And a lot of those actually are the mitigations for some of the impacts that that it outlines. So it's not just that, we're going to update our tree code because more development means presumably more trees will get cut down. So we'll update our code to protect mature trees, plus require development to plant more trees. But we'll also like work with neighborhoods to plant more trees in existing neighborhoods, so there's mitigations on the programmatic and regulatory side that are included, not just our rules and regulations, but also like how we invest in community, say through a tree planting program. Next slide, please. So some high level findings, the no action does not meet our state required targets for housing and jobs. The alternative 1 exceeds them slightly, and alternative 2 exceeds them by a little more. I just want to remind people that these are the baseline minimum. So 38,000 is the minimum we have to accommodate of housing units. In terms of the potential for housing diversity, which we mean like a lot of different types of housing. So you've got single family houses, you've got townhomes, you've got like duplexes, You have smaller units in whatever format that people can live in when they're young and just starting out like in their first job, or when they're older and they've downsized. You have accessible units that don't have stairs, where counters are lower for folks who may have mobility challenges, right? So you have a diversity of housing types. Also has more potential for affordability because smaller housing is generally and relatively more affordable than larger housing. In terms of displacement risk, which is how we think about when people get pushed out of where they live because they can't afford to stay there. Um, so on the housing side, the no action has the highest because we have such a issue with housing supply that rents are rising much faster, rents and mortgages, than incomes. And so a lot of people are already getting pushed out of their neighborhoods and pushed out of Vancouver, frankly, to other places where housing is relatively more affordable. Alternative one has the lowest, and alternative two is higher than the no action. Um, uh, no, sorry. I think, Meredith, this should be higher than the alternative one, but lower than the no action. Is that correct? No, it's higher than the no action. Okay. So higher than the no action. Commercial displacement. So that's really thinking about like when you lose commercial services because they either, the building they're on, maybe they rent their space, is torn down for new development, or they just can't afford to stay where they are. In terms of the no action, that's the lowest, but it also provides the fewest new commercial spaces to house jobs and businesses. Alternative one is again higher than the no action, but it has more new spaces for businesses. And then alternative two is similar to alternative one, but it has the most new spaces for offices, businesses, jobs. And then in terms of vehicle miles traveled, the no action has the lowest overall, and that's not surprising because it has the lowest number of new housing units. And again, we're measuring a lot of these things. The impact is correlated to the number of households or housing units. And so it has the highest per capita, right? So that households drive the most in no action, but it is the lowest overall. In alternative one, it has a lower per capita or per household. Sorry, I should say per household. It's not per capita, it's per household. Per household, the BMT than the no action, but overall it is higher than the no action because again, there's more households and more people. Same to the alternative two. It has the lowest per household, but the highest overall. Next slide, please. So wrapping up here, and then we'll open it up for Q&A, and we have other slides with details on stuff. But again, the public comment period is from July 8th through September 8th. You have to, these comments will all be used in helping to create the final map, or what we call in SEPA land, the preferred alternative. Again, it's not just public comments, it's also policy and state laws and council, but it does really play a big role in sort of how we start to develop that preferred alternative and how we talk to council about what we heard from people and how the map responds to that. And then you can learn more. You can scan this QR code. We'll have links at the end. But there's a story map online that will walk you through all this in more details, and you can read the full draft environmental impact statement document if you really need to sleep, haven't been sleeping well, and need something to, no, I'm just joking. But if you're interested, and again, we'll use this to help shape the final map. Next slide, please. And so again, there is a process that you have to comment through in order, because SEPA just has this formal structure that you have to take comments in through. So there is a online comment form. We love the online comment form when people use it because it means it automatically populates a spreadsheet where we're listing all the comments, and it's very efficient on that end. So encourage you to try that. Of course, that's not the only way you can comment. You can always send email to ourvancouver2045@cityofvancouver.us. You can hard copy mail your comments to Meredith at the address there. You can leave a voicemail that will be actually a formal comment, transcribed into a formal comment at the number listed. And then we've got 2 in-person interactive public meetings coming up. Next Wednesday at Furstenberg, and then Saturday, August 9th at City Hall. And it's drop-in. You can walk around, talk to staff, look at boards. We'll have forms there where you can write down your comments if that's the way you'd like to submit them. So would invite everybody who's interested to come to that if they want to after this fairly thorough overview. Next slide, please. And then just coming up, again, we're going to understand potential impacts. We're going to use that to refine the map. We'll continue working on the draft policies and actions in the plan document itself and on the update to the Title 20, which is the development code. And we will eventually adopt final versions of all those things, and it will be supported by a final environmental impact statement, which again will include responses by theme to all the substantive comments that we receive through the DEIS public comment period. Next slide. Okay, so yes, we've gotten to the Q of A. I hope I haven't bored you too much. It is a really important process, but a pretty technical one, and we know it's not always the most compelling topic. So again, thanks for being here. If you want to ask a question, raise your hand or put a question in the chat. Meredith will facilitate, either unmute you and call you up or just read your question. Please wait to be called to unmute and ask a question. And again, you still have to submit these through the formal comment period, and we have plenty of time. I mean, this event is scheduled till 6, so hopefully we have plenty of time. But if we do have just a really amazing level of interest and we don't get to all the comments, we'll invite you to email us and we will follow up with you directly. So with that, I'll open it up.
Yeah, Elson.
Hello, Rebecca. It's been a while.
Hi, Elson. How are you?
Okay, so
Good.
I would just say at the outset that it appears from any of the plans that those of us that spent the many months working on the Tower Mall plan to symbiotically react with it or interact with the neighborhoods around it pretty much didn't need to be done because of the density changes in the neighborhoods anyway. With that, I do have a couple of questions.
Okay, and if I can just to say, Elson, a lot of the density changes are driven by the state, not by the city. So I know that, again, we still think sub-area planning is very important and working with neighbors is very important, and we have to obviously respond to state regulations. So
I appreciate that.
I hope you don't.
So
Yeah.
just for clarification purposes, does this only affect incorporated cities or does it affect counties? So specifically for Hazeldale and Orchard's unincorporated areas, for example, that are in the county, are they impacted with the same restrictions as the cities?
Brian, can you jump in? Does middle housing apply? I know that HB 1220 that requires unincorporated areas to plan for housing by income bands and demonstrate they can try to meet that applies to the counties, the unincorporated counties. But Brian, can you kind of walk through the rest of it?
No, that's exactly right. There's several applicable state laws that are playing a big role in this update process. There's one called HB 1220 that we talked about where we have to accommodate housing in various income bands and a set number of housing units that's essentially established by the state and then calibrated by what countywide population the county chooses. So those apply to all the jurisdictions, including unincorporated Clark County. There's another requirement to, it doesn't have a numerical target, but it just says we simply have to allow, in Vancouver's case, 4 and up to 6 units if it's near a major transit stop on residential lots. That is called HB 1110. It also applies to the southern cities. So Camas and Washougal, their numbers are different than ours. They're not required to go to 4 and 6. They're required to go to 2 and 4, but they're also subject to it. The rest of the county is not.
Okay, and then if you'll indulge me for one other question, I'm sure others have questions as well. So this is using the no alternative 1 and 2 are utilizing the middle housing plans within the existing growth within the existing boundaries of the city. Could some of this also be accomplished by expansion of the urban growth boundary?
So the county, the unincorporated areas have their own targets. So if we expand the urban growth boundary, we have to absorb those additional housing units and jobs that would have been. So just expanding the UGA and saying we can spread out this housing and people and jobs over more land is not an option. There's targets for all the cities and all the unincorporated areas that are non-agricultural resource land unincorporated areas. So areas in the urban growth areas that are not in the cities, those all have their own targets, and the county's going through a process right now to plan for those areas.
So we would see a similar impact, for example, in Hazeldale and Orchards as what's proposed with these alternatives in Vancouver.
Yeah, so say we expanded the urban growth boundary north to some piece of the UGA, say Hazeldale or Orchards or some other piece, right? Then they would all be subject to HB 1110, which is the 4 to 6 units on any residential lot, because they then be in the city, and those areas would come with additional population, housing unit, and jobs requirements that we'd have to accommodate. It wouldn't allow us to spread our current targets out over more space. It would increase our targets we had to accommodate in the new boundary.
Okay, I'm sorry, one final question.
Yeah.
Given that, would it provide the city with more flexibility in terms of sub-area or neighborhood planning as opposed to just imposing this on the current within the current boundary?
No, in the sense that it would not, every residential lot would be, and in a city that is impacted by this bill would have to have be allowed to have a minimum of 4 to 6 units. So it doesn't change that. It would add more areas where we needed to do sub-area planning and think about infrastructure and stuff. But it wouldn't change that allowance. It would just expand it to areas of the county where it doesn't currently have to apply because they're not impacted by HB 1110.
Okay, well, I have other questions, but I'll let somebody else jump in. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, Elson. We got one in the chat. It says, how are the East Vancouver car dealerships addressed in this process? Please share how the decisions were or will be made and how nearby residents can weigh in. Thank you.
Yeah, I know this has been a topic of a lot of conversation in the community right now, so really appreciate the question. So car dealerships are a use. The no action, so in our existing zoning code, which is what would presumably stay in place under the no action, car dealerships are allowed in certain spaces as a commercial use. So someone can't come in, like we can't control if there is a grocery store somewhere and the person who owns that building wants to sell it to someone who wants to put a car dealership there, and that is an allowed use in that area, we cannot change that, right? They become vested to that standard. So that's the reason that car dealerships are allowed in those areas that you're mentioning is because our current development regulations allow them to be. They are an allowed use in those areas. Through this process, we will be updating our allowed uses in the various zoning districts. And we are going to take a very close look at auto-oriented and car dealership, auto-oriented uses, car dealership, that kind of stuff, because we understand that it's not really providing neighborhood level services to folks or things they need on a daily basis, things like childcare and groceries and other stuff. So we'll be taking a close look at that. I'd be love to have a follow-up conversation with folks about and would love to have people put in their comments where they think car dealerships are appropriate and where they think they're not, because I think that could really inform that discussion.
Great. If the person who asked that, if you have follow-up questions, just let us know. It looks like the next person is Atul.
Yeah, hi. Meredith, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. Hi, Rebecca. So the question is about regarding the public comment process. So this weekend, our neighborhood association collected individually signed petition letters, like kind of public comments, and then each resident agreed for association to submit it on their behalf. Now, we have scanned it as a single PDF file. Well, I was wondering, how do we submit it so that it is all formally included in the public record, and mainly so that it is recorded as individual letters, rather. So, like, do we put it in a
Yeah.
spreadsheet and send it to you along with it, or I mean, how should we do it?
So Atul, just let me make sure. So you've the petition sort of is, you've scanned, like people have signed it. You've put those signed documents into one document, but you want them to be recorded as individual comments. Is that the question?
Yes, that is exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Anne Broach, are you on the line? I think they'd have to be submitted individually, but I don't know if that's correct. Can you?
Yeah, I mean, we could just hand deliver it, but then adds a burden to you to, process it. So,
Meredith,
these are
is
individual.
Anne
Yeah,
able to speak?
sorry,
Okay,
I
thanks,
was
Anne.
just trying to unmute myself here.
Yeah.
I will have to look back at the SEPA regs to be sure, but I think, so let me just make sure I'm understanding too. Is each of the letters saying something different, or is it kind of a form letter that each person has signed individually, or just wanted to clarify?
Right. It's sort of like a form letter. There are check boxes, but not everyone has checked the same boxes.
Got
So
it. Okay.
Mhm.
I think that, practically speaking, if, they're all in one PDF, we could then just separate them once they're emailed over. I don't think there would be an issue with that.
Okay, yeah, so Atul, instead of, don't submit them in the online comment form, email them to Our Vancouver 2045 at cityofvancouver.us, and then we'll separate them out into individual ones. Does that sound good?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mhm. Thank you.
Thanks, Atul. Okay, we've got a couple in the chat. So there's kind of 3 questions in a row here. I'll just read them all out, but we can take them one at a time. It says, will schools be expanding to support the larger population density? That's question 1. Question 2 is, will there be jobs that are targeted at young people built near the city center? Question 3 is there a growing population of elders? And if so, what is the long-term plan for them to thrive on their golden years? Let me know if you'd like me to repeat any one of those questions.
Okay, Brian, I'll ask you to jump in here on schools, but I'll just say that Brian can go into more detail, but we do coordinate this with schools. There are public service and facilities in that public service and capital facilities element. We have to show that schools can accommodate need long term. We work with the schools. We right now in our conversations with schools, we understand that actually enrollment is declining and there's a lot of excess capacity in a lot of schools, not all, of course, but many. Brian, can you just talk a little bit about impact fees and how development pays impact fees when it actually gets built, and how that goes to schools to help them meet their future needs?
There are 2 parts in which, as growth occurs, more funding flows to the schools. It's not a perfect system, but it does help alleviate some of the growth pressures. One is through what we call impact fees, which are authorized by the Growth Management Act and applied by the city of Vancouver when residential development occurs. We also have traffic and park impact fees, and those are based on a per unit basis. Right now, they distinguish between single and multifamily units, and one of our many requirements for this comprehensive plan update from the state is that we calibrate that a little bit further so that bigger houses with more people and more demand on the schools pay more. That's part of it. There's also that covers the bricks and mortar parts of new schools. In terms of, obviously teachers and other staff salaries are a huge expense in education, as state law is such that as enrollment increases, the state has to backfill that. So not a flawless system, but one that is reasonable in terms of ensuring that as enrollment grows, as population grows, there is money flowing to the schools.
Great, thank you, Brian. And we're happy to answer. So no, it's a bit technical, but if anybody has follow-ups on these, just please let us know. We're happy to talk more here or set up a time to talk to you offline. In terms of jobs for young people, that is a great question. So I think that's a hard one to answer. We are working to so outside of like, the city staff that maintain the streets and the buildings and do what we're here doing tonight and run the parks and all the stuff that staff do with the municipal government. But outside of that, the city doesn't create jobs. The private sector creates jobs. And so when we talk about like jobs for youth, that's sort of a tough one because it's from our perspective and from the perspective of the comprehensive plan, we can allow for a lot of uses in different areas. And some of those uses will be commercial and they will offer jobs to people. Who is hired for those jobs is not something we are able to like regulate through this process. I can say that, my understanding, and again, this is not scientific, but my understanding of sort of the decline in youth employment is that the jobs that folks used to do when they were in high school, like I worked at Dairy Queen, that their adults are now taking those jobs for various reasons. I don't know that that's the only issue, but that's what I've read about. So I do think having more jobs provides more employment opportunities to more people. And I'll also say that through the mapping process, we heard a lot about, it's important to have access to commercial areas near schools, particularly high schools, because kids need those services and their families do, but also because that kids need jobs and youth employment is a thing. And so one of the potential non-regulatory, non-mapping ways that we could get at that is for the city to work with partners to facilitate more of those youth job training opportunities, job fair opportunities to connect kids with jobs in the private sector. I'll say on the city side, we also do have internships. Like right now, we have 2 amazing interns from Fort Vancouver High School helping us out in our team. So there's that path, but that's not the one that's going to make the biggest impact. It's really private sector having employment opportunities that youth can access and then being connected to those. So that's probably a very unsatisfying answer. I'm sorry, but that's what I can say. And then in terms of elders, so we know a lot about the type of housing that elders need to stay in their communities. And it's typically smaller than what they were in during, the years they were raising a family or working full time. It's typically more accessible. So things like no step entry, bathroom on the ground floor, internal things at the right heights for folks who may be using mobility devices. And it's typically near stuff that doesn't require them to drive because they often their ability or willingness to drive declines over time. So having things close to you where you live, and also access to public transportation. And then the last thing is, we just know that folks on a fixed income, again, they need more affordable housing. We also know that older folks have, there's this epidemic of loneliness. And so also being able to connect elders with resources, with community centers, with those sort of things is really important to quality of life. And so we're thinking about it both on the housing side, access to things they need side, transportation side, but also more that social community side.
Great. I think I saw, go on.
Sorry for jumping in, but this last topic of the elderly, I wanted to understand how has that informed the comprehensive plan?
Sorry, I didn't understand fully at all the last topic of what?
With this particular topic of aging in place or aging in the same community,
Yeah.
whether that has, how has that impacted the decisions that have gone into the comprehensive plan? Thank you.
Yeah, so aging in place, again, that we're thinking about it on the housing side, so the types of housing that's available. So thinking about incentivizing things like accessible housing, where you've got a no-step entry. It'll work for someone with a walker or a wheelchair. There's a bathroom on the first floor if there's 2 floors, right? If stairs are hard. So just those sort of like, what's the built environment and can you move around in it, get to it? The second thing is putting more services near housing. So folks who don't or can't drive can get to it or can easily get to it on transit. So again, that connected, accessible neighborhood really does support aging in place. And then lastly, looking at sort of more programmatic stuff that connects elders with community, with opportunities for ongoing learning, for exercise, for connection, for all that. So that's sort of the way we're thinking about aging in place.
Great. I think Jean Avery was next, and then Lee will get to you. Jean, if you want
Jean,
to
you're
come. Oh,
And
gotcha.
unmuted. Yes, and thank you to my earlier question about the auto dealerships. I certainly will be taking that up with you folks again. I wanted an explanation, please, of your very detailed interactive maps and how that relates to commenting on the EIS. I've done a lot of reviews of EISs, and I'm not sure that these responding to the interactive maps is the same thing as responding to the EIS. Are those two different items, and can you explain that further, please?
Meredith, you want to take that one?
Sure. And again, correct me if I'm wrong, but the information that's in the interactive maps is kind of a closer look, like really zoomed in microscope view of what's in the draft EIS. So in the draft EIS, there's a section on alternatives. One of the chapters is called alternatives. It has some maps that are in the document. They're just a little bit difficult to see. So we just wanted to make it a little bit easier for people to be able to go in and easily kind of compare and contrast what the different alternatives would mean next to each other. And then the information that's in those, like if you click on the interactive map, it pulls up a pop-up box that shows you like a little table with some information, and that the information that's in those tables is from another chapter, the summary chapter of the draft environmental impact statement. So if you're commenting on the alternatives, then you're still commenting on the draft environmental impact statement, just kind of through the interactive map. And I don't know if you had any additional.
No, I think you captured it, Meredith. I would say those are just meant to provide a more detailed view, because we recognize that, looking at a very detailed map on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper is probably not going to show you the details that you want to see. So those would be fair game for comments as well.
Could I just add, yes, it looked as if your interactive maps were very creatively done, but typically don't you fill out your comments on the EIS form itself rather than on the city's form that were being sent?
You mean the form that we've linked? Can you go to the way to comments, the comment slide, Meredith? So you mean this form, this Survey Hero form that is showing us the way
Whatever
to comment?
brings me to the interactive maps and the summary of the alternatives. So I think I commented on that, but it was very high level. Is that also going directly to the EIS, or is that going to the city?
So Jean, are you talking about comments you made to an old interactive map earlier in the process?
No, I don't think so.
So the thing that you'll go to when you visit the story map doesn't allow you to comment on the map. You have to do one of
Provide
these.
your comments by September 8.
Yep. And that's going to take you directly.
That's
If you click on one,
it.
it's going to take you to these things. So yes, that will be a formal comment if you follow those instructions.
But all it's saying is, superhero, what are your comments? And it's one box.
Yep,
That's
and you
all
can
it
write as
is.
much as you want, and there are your comments.
Now, is that going back to the city or is that going to the EIS directly?
The city is issuing the EIS. This is the formal way to comment on it. So it is going to the city through the formal comment period for the EIS. So what you submit there is commenting on the EIS. We are the people who receive all those comments.
So the city is preparing the EIS and the comments that we send to you are the ones that you will build into the final EIS?
Correct.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm sorry it wasn't clear earlier.
Okay,
That's great. That's why we have these sessions. Okay,
right.
Lee, we'll go to you, and then we'll get a question that's in the chat, and then we'll bounce over to Atul. Lee or Leah?
Hi, yeah, Leah, thank you. So I wanted to circle back to the jobs for young people, and I realize you all are in the private sector, and there's also no magic wand that will fix employment rates of like 18 to 35. I'm also not a city planner, so I don't know what it will necessarily take to um, make an impact, but I do feel like there are things that you could probably glean from like demographics and like where young people do typically work when they are working, and like are there things that correlate with that are in places. So I think for me, the first place my mind goes to is probably like downtown Vancouver, and like what types of industries are there, or how close are young people living to like industrial places where having a very able body is useful and things like that. And so I'm wondering, in kind of a similar vein to like how we're handling making sure like our elderly population can grow and thrive. You're looking at like, well, these are the things that they would need, these are the things that they tend to gravitate towards. Is it Are similar things being thought about in terms of like employment and young people, and like how to also get people, because the loneliness epidemic, I think, spans far past just the elderly population. Sorry, I know that was a
Yeah.
lot.
No. I think you're raising great issues, and we will. Please make a comment on this. I mean, we'll think about it regardless, but please do submit a comment related to this. So, here's kind of the way we think about it, and from this built environment perspective, right? Is when we think about youth, right? We assume, especially younger kids, like you don't drive. So what are the things in the built environment they need access to? Definitely schools, daycares, parks, housing that fits larger families rather than, our average housing, our, our average household size in Vancouver is 2.3 people per household. So that's not family size. So the market's driving towards average, so how do we facilitate more family size units that work for families with youth, including high school students? I also think just a lot of access to employment for youth is transportation. Right. Again, we can't control who gets what job, but we do have a lot of influence on what are the transportation options that people who don't drive have, which does expand sort of the pool of access for youth to get to different places where they may work without driving or needing a parent to drive them there. I do think that included in terms of like in my experience with more industrial employers, those jobs really typically are coming, not all, but right, there's typically some process for pipeline for trade schools, job training, workforce training into them. The unions play a role in this, and so I do think we can look at like, is there a role for the city to encourage this, or even just sort of disseminate information about this? Again, this is a tough one because we can zone and create land for jobs, and we can zone and create housing for lots of people, including families, but we can't make them match necessarily that there's jobs for everybody in the family who wants to work near where they are. It's more about the access and opportunity piece. So I'm not sure that's super helpful, but it is kind of reflective of our thinking, and we'll do some more thinking on it as well. I appreciate you raising it.
Great. Thank you, Leah. And in the chat, we had a question. It says, could you comment on how well you're integrating the council's general goal for enhanced public health in our city with the physical development plan? And hold on, there's a part of this question that I cannot read. And need to say a very impressive presentation on the quality of life integration with the statutory nuts and bolts. And then Atul, we'll get to you, and then Tina.
Great. And then, so it was the council's general goal for enhanced public health. Is that the question? Health. Okay. Yeah. So we heard a lot through the community engagement process at all the phases about like the things that are important to people in terms of their overall wellness. And so, I mean, some of that is about like physical activity. So you'll notice that one of the action alternatives puts more housing near parks. And that was because people and schools, and that's because people told us people need access to parks and schools. They need access to open space. That's incredibly important to people's health and wellness. The other thing is just access to healthcare. So, you know, certainly our local land use plan is not going to fix the challenges with the healthcare system in America. And we would never claim that it would. But what we do have some control over is we know where healthcare providers are located, and can we put more housing in those places where there are health, you know, kind of concentrations of healthcare services, or put them in places that have really easy transit access. So like for instance, along Mill Plain, you know, you've got Peace Health, but you've got a bus that will get you right there from the length of Mill Plain, 1-seat ride. You just have to get on it. So putting more housing near those transit stations, for instance. So those are some of the ways we think. And then connected and accessible neighborhoods, this idea that people get to or can access things that they need regularly near where they live. And this is, you know, there's tons of survey stuff on this that, you know, this will, this increases quality of life. Like the less time people spend commuting, the more time they spend with their families, the less stress they, right? Like there's a lot of like qualitative survey data on this. There's also a lot of information on emissions and air quality. So if people have things near them where they don't have to drive and can walk or take some other mode, or just don't have to drive as far, the air quality is better, emissions are quality, and that has an impact. Emissions are better, that has an impact on respiratory health, chronic disease, etc. So those are some of the ways we think about wellness and quality of life and health through the built environment. It's a really good question. The built environment hugely impacts people's health and wellness and quality of life. And so those are some of the ways we're thinking about it. I would love to hear your comments on either in the forum or offline. Email us on other ways you think that we could be doing that. That's a really, really, really good comment, important observation, something we're thinking about as well.
Great. All right, next we have Atul, and then Tina, and then the one in the chat. So Atul.
Yeah. Hi, Rebecca.
Hi.
So I'm looking at the comment form, the survey hero form, and it has a bunch of checkboxes for the topics. And when I looked at it for the first time, I couldn't figure out what the first term alternatives meant. It took me a little bit of head scratching to figure out that we are talking about the map, alternative one, alternative two, and so on. So it's just a comment on the general UI piece of it. So it's helpful to have either a tooltip for it or some descriptive text next to it, or just make it more explicit as to what exactly checking that box is saying to us, saying to you. So so that people can check the right boxes. Yeah. So So just that
Meredith,
we had
Meredith,
difficulty in explaining it during our last when we had our event this Sunday. We had difficulty explaining to people as to what exactly those ones meant. So thank you.
Meredith, since you've been more familiar with the ways to provide comment, does that make sense and can we update it? Okay, great. Thank you, Atul. We really
Yeah,
appreciate that feedback.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And just, yeah, the reason we have to use this funny language is because of the State Environmental Protection Act, just the way it has us write stuff in the draft environmental impact statement. We wanted to use that same language to cross-reference stuff, but we understand that it's confusing. So I can look into making that more clear. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah.
All right, Tina.
Yeah, I want to very, very loosely circle back to the comment about the car dealerships. And so in the grander scheme of things, I see that the plan has like goals for more mixed use neighborhoods where there's residential areas mixed in with commercial space. And I think that's great, especially considering that we're out of space. And but and you've said, answering some prior questions, like that our current policy still allows businesses or builders to build like for example a car dealership or something that does not vibe with what the plan is. And so I was wondering, or I would love to see if the city could like put into effect like a moratorium or something to those kind of building practices, since we know that this is going to be a thing of the past. And I have asked this at other meetings before, and I've always been told, yes, we understand. And we don't want this either, but policies are, and it takes for so long to amend the policies. And in the meantime, there's a lot of like very stupid and ineffective building happening in like in my area of the neighborhood in like spaces that had been previously undeveloped. So I think that's kind of like almost negligent to allow that to happen. And also what I see is that some existing retail spaces sit empty. So to allow builders to build more just retail space that's a strip mall with lots of car parking, no residential qualities or considerations at all, I just feel that needs to stop. And I wonder if a moratorium or something like that would do that. And then lastly, I don't know if you guys are aware, I've read about Costco, of all the people in California, doing a project, a pilot project where they're building a complex that's housing in and around a Costco thing. So in my mind, it's like, okay, great. Every new seasons, every Walmart, everything is going to look like that, where we're taking away some car parking, where we're putting housing right there. So yeah, I'm wanting to ask you to kind of push towards that faster, because I mean, we're out of time, we're out of space. And yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I super appreciate those comments, and I think we can. I mean, moratoriums are possible. Our council would have to determine that they wanted to do that, and so we can kind of follow up to see if there's appetite for that. I'd say so. Yeah, we have the same sort of feeling, right? Like we need to get this done. And we've been working toward it for a long time. We are really hoping to have it done by early next year, updated code. And in the meantime, some things will develop in ways that are not consistent with this plan. And so that's a stress that we have too. And so I share that. I think, one of the things that we've talked about internally is like, the more work we try to do before this, the longer it's going to take us to get this done. So there is some balance there. But you're absolutely right. Like these processes are very long. You establish a vision, you start to think about how you can achieve it. And in the meantime, your existing policies and regulations are letting things happen that are counteractive to that future vision. And it's not good, right? It is though the way sort of development works in the sense that people will vest to current codes. And so even if we, you know, we're like, we can expedite this process and we'll get a new code tomorrow. If someone came in today with an application that vested, right, then they would be vested to the old codes. And so that's the way the system works. And that's a legal framework that is required. But we do have some tools, moratoriums are one. And again, we can kind of explore that. I hear you. It's something we worry about very much as well.
Great. Okay, the next question was one in the chat. It says, the zoning types in Washington have been consistent, i.e. R2, R5, and R6, for example, in this neighborhood. Are the new categories, i.e. low level, medium level, etc., intended to replace those zoning categories?
Yes, they are intended to replace those zoning categories. Zoning designations and districts are not consistent across jurisdictions. They look different. There's, of course, similarities across jurisdictions, but for instance, what we mean by R6 and what someone else means by R6 could be totally different. So the new districts are intended to replace all the old districts. Generally, the low scale neighborhood is most like the low density housing districts. So R2, R4, R6, R9. Ryan, help me out. R17. I think those are all the low scale ones. So like this is the most like that. It's not necessarily that where you have, and it's not in fact accurate to say that everywhere you have an R2, 4, 6, 9, and 17 in the current map, you'll now have a yellow low scale neighborhood, the new map. That's not correct, but it is the most like that. And a lot of the places that are currently R2, 4, 6, etc. Are yellow in the new maps, but that's why we want you to take a look at that. That's why we have that mapping, that story map online, so you can go in and literally compare on a neighborhood level, a parcel level, what is there today and what will be there in the future, or what could be there in the future based on the alternatives we're analyzing through this process.
That is all the questions that I had in the chat, and I don't see any more at the moment, but people feel free to take a break, raise your hand, drop any more in the chat. We'll stick around.
Elson, if you want to go down the annexation rabbit hole, we've got time.
Well, I wouldn't bother everybody else with that, but obviously I'll have some comments to submit. So
yeah, Elson, do you want me to follow up with you on it?
yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, I'll do that. I'll shoot you an email.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like Atul, you've raised your hand.
Yes, so I have a question actually on this slide itself, where it points out there's a low-scale neighborhood. Now, my question is with respect to the alternative called no action alternative, if that does that no action alternative mean that the zonings would not change, or would the zoning become equivalent to, let's say, low, if something is a single family area, will become equivalent to whatever is there in the previous slide? Thank you.
Well, I'm having kind of a hard time totally hearing the question, but are you asking, let me try to repeat it back to you. Is the question whether there's a direct conversion between the zoning in the no action and the most similar new zoning in the alternatives?
Exactly. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, there's not. The answer is no. Yeah. So there are areas that are low, are, say R5 or R6 today, right? They could be medium scale neighborhood in the one of the alternatives or both.
Yeah.
Areas that are
True.
commercial
It-
today could be mixed use or regional activity center in the one of or both of the alternatives.
Yeah.
So
So
no,
I do
there's
think that
not
I
a
did not
direct
say,
conversion.
yeah, looks like I did not state my question correctly. But basically, I'm talking about the bottom one here where it says no action alternative, right?
Mhm.
So suppose something is there marked as no, single family, one way or the other, would that then get changed to low density? Is that what's gonna happen? Because I mean, after all, the this like the state law would automatically kick in, right, and make changes. So is suppose at the end of it all, we just went for no action alternative, would that still change the zoning to
Yes, sorry, I
the
understand now. So if we just stayed with what we have today, so the existing zoning districts in um low density residential, so R2, 4, 6, 9, 17, those would all then, even if we did nothing by the deadline, which I believe is June of next year, the if we did nothing, the state model code would go into effect, and every single family lot would allow for 4 to 6 units per lot, regardless of what we do.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? We've got time. We can talk about other stuff, or we're also, if folks, if this, I hope this provided a good sort of primer or baseline understanding. Please do take a look at the story map. If you have questions, clarifications, you can always email us. Before if you want to understand more before you submit your comments, let us know. But again, definitely submit your comments through this formal channels. I see Leah has her hand up.
Yeah. And so just so you know, I'm kind of talking about this 18 to 35 range just because you need people to congregate together to have kids, and you need kids. Neighborhoods keep growing, and if that doesn't work, then nothing works. And so I think about that a lot, and what the future looks like. And I think this is a question a lot of cities have all over America right now. But I guess I think housing affordability is such a big thing, especially for people in that age range, that 18 to 35, of how do you establish yourself? And I think it's also a very vulnerable time as we're dealing with the unhoused increasing, and making sure that people do have a pipeline to affordable housing. And so not to just super focus on the youth, but is there kind of a plan for that, based on the demographics? Are we headed in the right direction? Is this plan accounting for people's financial situation on average, and what they can actually afford to live in, and what that will look like for the next 10 to 15 years or so?
It accounts for it so under the new state law, HB 1220, we do have to plan for not just number of units, but units by income band. And so when you see on the far left of this table on the top, housing units needed through 2045, we need 4,371 units that are affordable to people or families that make 30% of the area median income and have permanently supportive services on site. So in that sense, we're very much thinking about the affordability of housing. And we don't have a lot of options, though, in our direct control for making that happen, besides allowing for a range of options so that people can build smaller units. People are incentivized to build smaller units, which tend to be cheaper. That doesn't address the need for families at all. We've got other kind of regulatory strategies to do that, but we are limited because the city doesn't build housing. We don't build any housing. So the private market builds housing, and affordable housing is built by nonprofits and the Vancouver Housing Authority. And the level of subsidy that is needed to produce these affordable units gets bigger the more affordable they are. And that public subsidy is not resourced at levels that would allow us or any other city to meet our below 50% targets. that requires deep subsidy from the state. I mean, the city has an affordable housing bond. We use that to fill gaps in funding for affordable housing projects, but the majority of the funding is coming from the federal and state level through the low income housing tax credit program and through the state's housing trust fund. And the reality is there is simply not enough of that public funding by orders of magnitude to meet the housing needs at the lower end of the income spectrum. And this is true across the country. So we are limited in what we can do through a land use plan. We're going to do all we can through the land use plan, though. So that includes lots of flexibility in housing, because people will build to some extent will build to the demand. Like if people want smaller units, they'll build to that. If people want places like age in place, they will build to demand to some extent. So lots of regulatory flexibility to have a range of options that work for different people. The city again does have, we have federal pass-through funds, and we have our local affordable housing fund that we are funding affordable housing projects in the city. We're often we're always the smallest portion typically, and we're usually the last money in, and we're filling the gap that federal and state resources can't, because we have the smallest amount of dedicated resources. So housing is tricky. We need like World War II levels of housing investment out of the federal government in order to meet the affordability needs of people across this community, across the state, across this country. And it's not in place now. So that's a challenge, a huge challenge. We're doing what we can on the land use side. In terms of youth and sort of the population you're focused on, I did just want to add that we have done quite a bit of outreach with youth. We've worked with schools across the community, VPS, Evergreen Public Schools. We have done engagement focused with Clark College. So we've got quite a bit of feedback from, students, people who are actually, between 15 and 24 years old. And they've told us a lot of great stuff about where housing should be, what parks should be like, what transportation should be like, how they want to access services. So that is incorporated into this. And we really try to make a very concerted effort, because we do understand that a lot of times, we're planning for 20 years out. The people who are in high school now are the adults who are going to live with the impacts of the planning we're doing now. So we want their input. So we have done a lot of that and tried to be responsive.
Thank you. There's one question in the chat, and then chat is and Janice will get to you. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name. The question in the chat is, where in the comment section do we request a moratorium on car dealerships in East Vancouver? It seems that voting for just one alternative is too general.
Yeah, put that specific comment in the comment forum, and then honestly, I would write to City Council if that's something you want to advocate for. Let me just put in the chat the email that goes to all of the council.
If you put it in the chat, I'll get it and I can send it to everyone.
Okay. Well, actually, it is chat disabled. So Meredith, I'm going to send it to through Teams. And you can put it in the chat. Okay.
And then, yes, Chatham and Janice.
I love it when people really give it a hard try.
I really apologize.
How do we say it?
All right, it's Chatham.
Chatham. Okay.
Pretty
Chatham,
straight.
you've got the floor.
Listen, thanks so much for a really good presentation. You guys, have obviously put tremendous amount of hours and time into this whole thing. And, I love that thought about auto dealerships. And while they're at that deal, maybe the parking lot at Vancouver Mall somebody could take a look at it. I don't think all of that's being used this day and time. This is a deal where you're going to have to hunt and scrounge and look in every corner to find solutions for something that is virtually going to be unsolvable anyway. So many people moving into this area. I mean, half the country is going to be uninhabitable in another 10 years because it's going to be too hot. We all know that. Those who don't believe it, I just feel sorry for them. Anyway, thanks again for your good help. And, I wouldn't count on any more federal dollars, on your housing deal. It ain't going to happen with this dude. Thanks so much for a good presentation, and we'll look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Great. Well, thank you for being here. Appreciate that feedback. Yes, and I just want to acknowledge, right, it is really important, we believe, our council believes, for us to know and say where we are trying to go and what are the problems we want to solve, and what is the type of community that we want to live in and we want Vancouver to be in the future. And there are constraints on our ability to meet those, both through the construct of a comprehensive plan, which is focused on land use primarily, and through sort of our national sort of system of capitalism, right? Like it's a private land ownership system. So individual property owners determine what they're going to do with their land. And so we're always operating within that, right? Like it's not that the city decides. We can put regulations or a framework around the range of things that can happen on a site, but we can't tell you affordable housing goes here, car dealerships go there. We can limit it though, and we do have some tools. So I think to your point, Chatham, is that we have very ambitious goals. Will we reach all those goals in 20 years? No, we probably won't. We don't have the tools or the systems we need. Can we make a lot of progress on moving towards better outcomes for folks than we would get otherwise? I think we can. And so I think it's important to be both hopeful and pragmatic because the best we can do is try for our community and be as thoughtful and intentional and focused as we can in trying to meet the goals and the needs. And we are resource constrained. We are in a specific system that makes us hard to solve everything at its root cause in the forever, right? But we always say cities are in the forever business, right? So let's keep getting better over time and keep trying to meet those needs, looking to the future. So yeah, I encourage everyone to be both hopeful and pragmatic. I think that's how we can make progress.
Thank you. All right, we've got another one in the chat. It says, what happens to housing that now belongs to a senior? Will they be forced to sell their house?
No. So if you own your house, again, you're the decider. That's capitalism. That's private property. The only time a government would like foreclose on a house or something is if you can't pay for it, either the mortgage or the taxes. There's a good program in the county. So if folks own their house, retire, they're on a fixed income, it's hard for them to pay their taxes. There's a program where they can just take that out of the equity they have in their house so they can stay in their house. It does reduce their equity and the sort of generational wealth transfer, but it is a good program. So no one can really force people to sell their property if they don't want to, with the exception of governments can, in some rare instances, use eminent domain to get property that's needed for essential public services, so like roads. But we have to pay market value for those, and typically we just negotiate with people until we get to a agreed upon price. So there's not a lot of tools out there. Again, the zoning code, the regulations, they put parameters around it, but by and large, it allows a range of things. And so I think our job, and with your help, is we want to get those ranges right. So that, we're promoting the good stuff people need and want and discouraging or not allowing in many places the bad stuff that people don't want. But we have to allow some use on every parcel. You can't just, it's called a regulatory taking. If you just don't let anything happen, that's not legal. There has to be allowed use on parcels. So again, let's get the range right. Let's get the code right. Where do we want different things? What do we want the scale to be? How do they interact with each other to meet our goals? And where do we want to limit stuff to very specific places because it has impacts that don't meet the community's needs?
Wonderful. I don't have any more comments in the chat or questions in the chat at the moment, and I don't see any hand raised. But again, we'll stick around in case some thoughts bubble up.
You're welcome to stay and chat or jump off. We said we'd be here till 6, so we'll be on till 6. But if folks are done and don't have any more questions, feel free to take off and have dinner. And thanks again for being here. Meredith, the way we set this up, so you, Brian, me, and Ann just stay till 6, correct? Yep, okay.
Well, I'll raise my hand.
Great.
So
Please do.
just a technical, probably obvious question. So where you go from the, hang on a second, pull it up here. The low density to the medium density, for example. So if you have a, and mixed use would be the same. So if you have an alternative which has mixed use, as is occurring in Southcliff, and that mixed use is not incorporated in the plan, and I know you have plan 1 and plan 2 alternatives, but then I assume it's like squeezing a balloon. You have to move that density to someplace else. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I mean, the reason we have, right, we have minimum numbers of minimum targets, right? That's the absolute minimum we can do under our capacity analysis. You know, we've created a range to give council choices. So you see that in alternative 1 and 2, you slightly exceed the minimums by some degree, and that's to give choices so that it's not 100% a balloon where density has to move. You could just reduce density some places and you still meet your targets because we've got this range, right? So we're anticipating people providing questions like, you know, I don't want to be mixed use. I want to be medium scale neighborhood. And that might make sense, right? And so we've built in some flexibility. But again, the flexibility is not, the other reason we built in is some flexibility is that we can estimate zone capacity and we can estimate development feasibility, but we do not have a way to model what individual people will decide to do on their property over 20 years, right? So it's kind of hard. I mean, to some extent it's a balloon, but we did build in some flexibility to give council choices to just say, you know, that shouldn't be mixed use. It should be a medium scale neighborhood, and they don't need to necessarily put it somewhere else. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. And then just a broader question. So for example, taking any street, but Mill Plain is an example, where you have new mixed use designated in the alternatives. I can't presume that you would be allowing egress from each individual property along there. So that they would have to come into a given neighborhood in order to access those commercial functions. Would that be correct?
We would treat commercial different than residential. I mean, typically we're not going to want you to take access off of the primary street, but if there's only a primary street, then that would. So I think it would depend on the use. And, you know, clearly on Mill Plain where it's access restricted, it'd be right in, right out, which creates some other stuff. So yeah, and I mean, that will be tricky. I think you're very correct to point out that that's access to some of those parcels is going to be tricky. I also think, you know, council's direction was to make any BRT line mixed use. you could provide some comments that there's some areas that may not be appropriate for that because of the access issue. That would be a really relevant, appropriate comment that, you know, then we'd have to work through. I mean, we'll be working through those transportation standards anyway, but at least you get it in the record.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'll let somebody else jump in if they.
Yeah, we had one in the chat, kind of a follow-up from the question about, you know, what happens to housing that now belongs to a senior? Will they be forced to sell their house? The kind of follow-up to that was, I live on 165th, and I understand that this street is impacted by this new plan. Will I have to move? Question mark.
No, no. So, couple things to understand. When we change the zoning designation on a parcel, what's there is allowed to stay there for as long as it wants, right? So you're vested to the old use and code. There will be limitations on how much you can expand, but really for housing, there's not. So no, you will not be pushed out. No one will be forced to move because a new zoning district has been applied to their house. It just means that if your house was ever, you know, if you ever wanted to put another unit on your lot, you could. If you sold it and someone wanted to tear down your house and build another building, they maybe could under the new development regulations. But no, what you living where you are with the building you have and the use you're in is not your ability to be there is not changed by this. You're vested to the old code as long as your use and building continue into the future. You'll be allowed to stay there. No one gets kicked out.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Toby Graff, what's the process for challenging or raising a question about the zoning? Well, I don't know how to, the color assigned to a particular area of the map.
Yeah, I comment.
What I'm talking about is the area between Southeast 164th, south of 34th, and Southeast 165th Way, which is now designated with the red, that little strip. We've talked
Yeah,
about it before, but I don't know what the process is for officially raising a question about it.
Yeah, just comment. So in the ways to comment, make that comment and say, I don't think this is appropriate for the reasons. I would like it to be X and not this, and just make that comment and here's my issues with it. And I mean, Anne, jump in if there's any more information, but that's a substantive comment we would then respond to. Tell us why you want something different, and that's we will have to respond to that and sort of it'll be in the FEIS. And is that right? Do I have this right?
Yep, that's correct. Yep, go ahead and we would encourage, the more detailed and specific the comments, the better. It's definitely very helpful to the process.
Excellent. I'll do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let me ask a process question, and that is, so you've got sort of a no action alternative 1, alternative 2. Just in working with the council, once you've received all the comments, are you then taking all 3 of these to the council, or are you reformulating a preferred alternative plan to present to the council singularly?
Yeah. So we've never understood, this has never really been a choice between one or the other, right? It's between the no action to alternative B.
Right.
It allows us to analyze a range of potential things. We are taking the DEIS findings to council. We're doing our second workshop on just what it says about stuff on August 4th. The last one was July 14th. Then we will start to go back to them and talk about a preferred alternative, what we've heard from the community through this process, through other processes, how we think their policy priorities kind of inform this, and it will likely be a combination of all 3.
Right.
Yeah, so there'll be a whole public process around that. And then after, this is not the last, I mean, we want people, please comment through the DEIS process, but we will then at some point later this fall, early winter, we'll release a draft plan, map, code for public comment. So this is not your last opportunity to comment on the map.
Right.
So there'll be more process around that.
Thank you.
I assume so, but wanted to clarify.
Yes, no. This is a big deal, right? We know it's a big deal. It changes things. I think it's important for folks to know that like change is incredibly incremental and it will move quite slowly. Most people who own a single family lot will not do anything to it. And we know that. We've seen that from other places. The changes related to middle housing move fairly slowly. And like any development, it happens through several development cycles and it depends on a lot of stuff, what's feasible, what can be financed. But it does change what's possible. And we know that's a big deal to people. Anything else? Really, we've got time, so got 9 whole minutes. If anybody has, I'm really happy to talk about kind of anything that's of interest related to the DEIS. Any questions? There's no bad questions.
Nobody wants to jump in. I guess I will again. So I am just, and you did answer this, Rebecca, but I am trying to clarify. So, so the county is impacted. So we have a friend that lives in Hazeldale, so unincorporated area, in a very nice residential area there. So are these middle housing standards imposed on the county so that she'll end up with the same kind of directive, I guess, or her neighborhood will, but it'll be through the county instead of through the city, obviously. Does the middle housing impact all area? What about Hawkinson? What about, other more rural areas?
No, it doesn't. Brian, if you can help me out here, I'll start a few thoughts and then it'd be helpful if you could jump in to talk about what we understand the county's considering. So I do the HB 1110, the middle housing bill that requires 4 to 6 units per lot, does not apply to unincorporated areas currently. It does apply to smaller cities, but there's a different impact. So not all small cities, but in our county, Camas and Washougal are also impacted. But Brian, I think you said it's 224 or something. I don't know.
You're muted, Brian.
Impacted, but at a lesser scale.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do think you're going to see. So Brian, if you could talk about, because while the county doesn't have to do this exactly, they do have to show that they can meet their housing numbers and that they're making a good faith effort to meet the income bands, which is going to require different types and sizes of housing, smaller lots, etc. So Brian, can you talk about what, just through the public process, you understand the county is contemplating?
Sure. So the county faces a similar timeline than we do. They have to adopt their comprehensive plan covering all of the areas that outside of cities. And they're not subject to HB 1110, so they are not in a situation where every single family zoned lot is going to have to allow the 4 to 6 units. They are subject to most of the other laws that they have to allow, for instance, 2 ADUs on every single family lot. They have to plan for a set number of housing and show that they can accommodate a set number of housing units. That's the HB 1220 part. So as part of that, they're going to have, similar to us, they're going to do an environmental impact statement. They've already more or less adopted the mapping of that. And so they are going to need to show that they can accommodate their set number of housing units, which is quite a bit. it's similar, if not even more than what we're facing. And so my understanding of their strategy isn't to try and change every single family zone. It's to bulk up on multifamily zoning in areas near where there's already multifamily zoning. So not everywhere, just kind of expand the. So, but that's it's worth checking, or having your friends check with the county on exactly where they are in the process and what they propose to do. And some of their mapping is, it's not been finalized, of course, they might change it, but some of it's already out there. So in other words, if with you could figure out what your friend's property might be zoned under the county's thinking so far.
Yeah, it was just a hypothetical, just using our
Okay.
property.
Oh, okay.
I
Sorry.
didn't know about
Yeah.
the
Didn't catch
imposition
that
of
part.
standards
Yeah,
on
yeah,
single
yeah.
family lots within unincorporated areas.
Yeah.
So thank you, Brian.
Yeah, I think it's important to know that even though the laws may apply differently or only to some areas or whatever, everybody is going to have to make changes to meet their housing targets. I mean, I don't think any jurisdiction in Clark County is going to be able to just do what they're doing and meet their housing targets because, essentially, I mean, my perspective, so this is maybe not the city's perspective, but my perspective is the legislature really got fed up with 4 or 5 large cities around the state taking tons of action to address housing and a lot of smaller communities not doing much to address the statewide 2 million unit shortage. And so they raised the floor. They basically just said everybody's got to do more. And that's what a lot of this legislation is trying to sort of bring the whole state along on taking action related to the supply side shortage and the affordability crisis we're experiencing. So everybody's going to have to do something.
Yeah.
I think it's really a degree of change thing.
Well, appreciate the presentation.
Yeah, thank you for being here. I just sent you an email.
Okay.
Okay.
You'll be seeing more of me.
Okay. I
We've
don't doubt
got
it.
one in the chat. It says, how does this affect neighborhood CC&Rs?
Great question. It doesn't. So
Well,
CC&Rs.
let me be specific about that.
Yeah.
The state is mandating that single family dwellings now, I mean, lots with single family dwellings contain 4 to 6 units. Suppose the lot is subject to a property restriction limiting use to a single family dwelling. A properly recorded, valid property restriction.
Great question, Toby.
Yeah. Yeah. So, really good question. This comes up a lot. I appreciate you answering it. So, those CC&Rs are private covenants. The
Yes.
city and so local jurisdictions don't enforce them and won't enforce them. So if someone came in with an application in your neighborhood where it has a CC&R that says one housing unit per lot and asked to build 3 units, we would permit it. We don't even have records of the CC&Rs. The way that you would have to enforce that is through private legal action to enforce a private covenant. Cities don't have anything to do with that.
No, I understand that.
Yeah.
But is state law overriding those are
It's not that state law is like negating them, which did happen in California where they basically retroactively negated private covenants that like in the 70s, the state actually went retroactively and negated racial covenants. Privately recorded racial covenants that said you couldn't sell your house to X person, right?
Right.
That was just retroactively negated. That has not been done in Washington. It has been done in California related to middle housing. So it doesn't like override the validity of the private covenant between the private parties. It's just that we don't consider that. It's not a factor in what we will permit or zone.
No, I understand that.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's not overriding it. If someone breaks their CC&Rs and I'm not a lawyer, right? So this is just my summary of my understanding is that if someone gets a permit and builds something that's not compatible with CC&Rs, private parties still have an ability to enforce those through legal action, is my
Right.
understanding. Again, talk to a lawyer, like I'm not an attorney, but that's my understanding.
Okay.
The one thing the state law has said is that new private covenants can't be adopted. So if there was a private covenant adopted after these laws went into effect last year or the year before, then that would be a different situation. But if they're existing longstanding laws, there's nothing in the state law that prevents the homeowners association from enforcing the CCNRs.
Yeah, these are recorded before the city of Vancouver even annexed the area.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much.
Yeah. Any last call? We're at 6. We're happy to take any last questions if anyone has them.
Let's all go get a drink.
I'll join you, Toby.
Thank
Thank
you
you very
everyone for
much.
joining us.
Thank
Really
you.
appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Take
Have a good
care.
night.
Thanks so much
Bye.
for a great
Thank you.
presentation.